Hello, today is the Northern Renaissance, so let's get right to it. So we're going to be talking, as I said, about the Northern Renaissance. And the reason that it's Northern is because we have been looking at Italy, okay? So if we look at this map, here is Italy, where I'm circling, right? The boot. And you can see that Spain is roughly the same level, but most everything above that is going to be considered northern. So even France is going to be considered northern. Obviously, we're going to be looking a lot at the Netherlands here. We'll also see some work from England and Germany, what is now Germany. So this was the Holy Roman Empire at the time. And if you'll remember in the lecture on the Reformation, I mentioned that the Holy Roman Empire sacked Rome. So if we take a look here, okay, so this is a little bit more detail on France, but then this is also showing us where some of the really important cities are. So we have Bruges here in the Netherlands now. Okay, we have Avignon in France, and we have Rome. So the Holy Roman Empire extends here, and they're the ones who sacked Rome, if you'll remember. Venice is here, right? We've talked about the golden quality of the light, etc. So today should be a little bit shorter, but one thing to keep in mind is the history, the socio-historical context of the Reformation, right? So think about that print of Luther preaching. And on our left, but his right, we have the Protestants who are wearing rather somber clothing and it's not very fancy. And then we have the Catholics on the other side being cast into hell and they're very ornately dressed, okay? So we're going to be seeing this sort of juxtaposition today. And one thing that I want to emphasize is that we do see humanism here in the north, but it's not as strong as it was in Italy, okay? So think about where the classical societies were located, right? So Greece and Rome, right? They're all in this area. And so we have a lot of ancient Roman sites and sculpture that's constantly being found in Italy, etc. So there's a much stronger connection in Italy to antiquity or classical sculpture than there is in the north. And in the north, we're going to see this combination of humanism, so some attention to classical culture, as well as promotion of vernacular texts. So this is the concept of writing in the everyday language. 1448, we have the printing press, which makes it much easier to spread knowledge and wealth, right? Because you don't have to handwrite every single book. And we have a growing interest in the antique, etc. So old literature and history and philosophy, educational reform, but we also see idealism incorporated. And idealism affirms the imagination and attempts to realize the mental conception of beauty and the standard of perfection juxtaposed with aesthetic naturalism and realism. So basically, you're going to have this renewed emphasis on the individual and some interest in classical art combined with this emphasis on everyday life as well as mysticism. So mysticism in religion has to do with something like being able to see visions and having a mystic cult, right? So think of the ideas of miracles, etc. Okay, so that's kind of the context for the aesthetic that we're going to see today. So very briefly, I want to show you very early Renaissance. This is French, okay? So what you need to know is that in 1309, the papal court, or the Pope, transfers from Rome here, okay, so Roman Catholicism, like we've been talking about, and transfers to Avignon. So there's anarchy in Rome, and so this Pope just moves all the way over to Avignon. And so with the Pope comes artistic patronage, as well as the ideas of the Renaissance that are already starting in Italy in 1309. Okay, so we have this introduction of Italian humanism and style and the very early Renaissance into a more northern area, more north than Italy. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this art. So this is a very famous illuminated manuscript. So an illuminated manuscript is a book that has been hand painted and the text written out by hand, etc. But this is very unusual in that it is a calendar. So this is by the Limbourg brothers, and it's called Les Très Riches Heures de Duc de Berry. Okay, and this is a book of hours, which is a devotional prayer book. And so you have a text for each hour of the day. So you would do what kind of is like a ritual in terms of praying each hour, etc. And so you have a lot of pages here, as you can imagine, right? 416 pages, 131 large miniatures, etc. Right? So it's a lot of detail. And you can see that there are some Gothic elements to these works, as well as this renewed focus on Renaissance and humanism. Okay, so you can kind of see in how flat this is, that it is, and look at the perspective. The perspective is really rather lacking here. So this would be a wall painting that's depicted, and the perspective is not convincing. Okay, so it's a combination of medieval and Renaissance, like we were seeing in Italy, the Proto-Renaissance. Okay, and this is early 1400s, 1413 to 16. And what we're seeing here is January. Okay, this is October, very famous. So again, you can see this attempt at naturalism with the foreground space, obviously in the foreground. And then you have the midground, and then you have the background. And at the top of each of these calendar images is information about the zodiac. I'm so sorry, my cat has fur all up my nose and it's really bothering me. Okay, so anyway, all right, so this is secular painting. This is not solely religious. Okay, we have some emphasis on mystical, right, with the zodiac. So this is unusual. And this is the first set of what is known as a genre painting, which is a depiction of a type. So these are not specific farmers, right? These are a type of person who would be farming, okay? So we're gonna keep moving, and the 1400s see the discovery of oil paint. And I mentioned this briefly in the lecture on the Reformation, but oil paint is vastly different from the tempera, because tempera dries flat and it creates these flat planes of color. But with oil paint, you can create these really rich, luminous layers, and you can allow for the light to reflect off. It's slow drying, so you can allow for blending, okay? So it's really seamless. And this is something that really comes out in the north. And so we're going to see a lot of oil painting. And oil painting starts in the north earlier than it does in Italy. But you can see how luminous this robe is. Okay, so this is called the Merode altarpiece. And this is a famous work. And what you need to know about the art of this time is that it is an observation of anatomy and everyday life and still life, combined with idealism as well as some humanism. So the goal is to make the unseen seen and to make what you're looking at vividly present. Okay, so this is not, think about the Italian Renaissance works that we looked at, right? So think about Raphael's School of Athens, for example. Okay, so the School of Athens is set in this very grandiose classical setting, right? And it's very distant. It does not look like something that you could participate in. It's very much lofty. It's very much above you. Okay, and this is fresco, right? So this is where the plaster and the paint bond, but you can see how much more flat this style of painting is compared to the oil paint. All right, so what we're seeing here is an extension of everyday life with elements of the religious in it. Okay. And we're also going to be seeing a lot more portraiture, which is another example of the move away from religious art into secular art. Okay, and there is unrest in the north at this time. The man who would become the Holy Roman Emperor takes over in the north and becomes the ruler of the Low Countries. The Low Countries are what the Netherlands were called because of the low sea level. Okay, so getting back to this work. So this is a triptych, and the word triptych, tri, means three. And so what you're looking at is a main panel with two wings, and these wings would fold in so that you wouldn't be able to see this image. Okay, so again, this is Robert Campin, the Marode altarpiece. This is 1427-ish. And what you're seeing is the Annunciation. So this is where Gabriel comes to Mary and tells her that she is going to bear the Christ child. And so what we're seeing is an everyday situation, okay? So this is what a Netherlandish, the Netherlandish domestic scene would look like. Okay, you can see woodworking tools here. So this is Joseph, the man who would become her husband. Here we have Mary, we have a still life. And there is this perspective, that the perspective is not entirely convincing, but some of that is intentional. And then here, hopefully you are realizing what this is. This is the donor portrait, okay? And they are looking on to this scene. It's not a vision, it's something that is happening. So you can kind of see how it's very different from the religion of Italy at this time. Okay, so we're gonna keep moving on, and this kills me because this work is just so amazing. If you have time, and this interests you, I would strongly encourage you to look more closely at these works. Okay, we have this really luminous skin. You can see the eyes, and you can see the eyelashes even. Okay, look how luminous her nose is. These are just absolutely stunning. But you can see that even the fashion here is different. These are somewhat more austere portraits, perhaps, than we have seen. And this is by the same artist as the Marode altarpiece. Okay, so again, the luminous skin, this naturalism, but it's not fully convincing. So if you look at the face, it is very naturalistic, but the body is much more flattened. And this is Roger van der Weyden. And van der Weyden studied with Campin, and this is an important work. So this actually is a bit of a throwback to Gothic art, and hopefully you can see why that would be. So we have this very flat, there's no space in the background, there's no sense of depth, and you have this gold background. But again, I just want to show you how incredibly detailed this work is, right? And you can see, you can see the individual hair on the fur, okay? You can see the blood droplets, all right? So these works are just exquisite. Look at the tears, okay? There's no way you could achieve a tear like this with tempera. All right, and so what we're seeing are these very heavy sculptural figures. And again, it's very flattened, but we have this depiction of grief in a way that we would never have seen in Gothic art. Mary is actually fainting. So this is the mother of Christ. And obviously this is Christ, who is now deceased, being removed from the cross, and you see other mourners. Okay. So again, this is before 1443. And you can kind of see how these figures are somewhat related to icons, but they are still fully Northern Renaissance. Okay, so another example of Mary Magdalene, who is a follower of Christ, being placed in a contemporary domestic setting. We have Van Eyck, who creates even more convincing domestic settings and natural settings. And his work is incredibly talented, technically very skilled. He has very startling realism. Again, with the use of oil paint to create these luminous images, these luminous people. And if you look here in the back, this work is particularly famous for this mirror. So this is a convex mirror, which means that it bubbles out. And you can see this distortion here of the window, and you can see the back of the people being depicted, but you can also see there's another two figures here. And you can see the reflection of the chandelier, and look at these beads, look how they glow. It's truly, truly amazing. So again, I wish we could spend more time on this, but this is a fascinating portrait of a man and his wife. It was long thought to be a wedding portrait. Now they're not so sure that that's accurate. And again, with iconography, okay, so the dog symbolizes fidelity. So if you've ever heard the name Fido for a dog, which I haven't actually met a dog named Fido, but you hear about that, I feel like, it's because of fidelity, right? The symbolism. These shoes would be worn by individuals in order to raise them above the ground. So these are what I like to call poop shoes. Because there would be poop and all sorts of unpleasant things in the street. And so you would wear these shoes to lift you above the poop. And you can see here that it's actually coated with poop, so poop shoes. And fashion accessory design students will probably have an idea of what that's actually called instead of simply poop shoes, because that's really stupid. And this is potentially a self-portrait. And again, right, with the luminous, incredibly powerful, you can even see like the veins in his eyes. And this overlay that you're seeing of these gray lines, this is called craquelure. And this is the cracking of the paint as it ages. So this is not intentional. But look, you can even see the bristles on his chin where he hasn't shaved, etc. So really just amazing work. All right, keeping going. So I have to pause here because this is the Ghent altarpiece, and this is the exterior of the Ghent altarpiece. So we talked about the triptych, the Merode altarpiece. So this would be the backs of my hands, right? So you wouldn't be seeing the center part. And so you're seeing here what's called trompe-l'œil, which is to fool the eye. I think I may have mentioned this before. And so this is the creation of an illusion. So these look to be sculptures, right? Set into a rather deep niche, okay? And then again, you have the donor portraits, you have angels, etc. And a contemporary domestic interior. You can see out onto the street. But this is all painted. And this use of gray and white and some black is called grisaille. So what is truly amazing about this altarpiece, however, is the interior. And this is what it would look like open. And this is from 1432, and it's known as the Ghent altarpiece because it is in Ghent, but it's the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb. And just look at how exquisite this is. So this would be like rock crystal or quartz. And so it is a clear stone, and you can see the detail that has been paid to every aspect of this. Okay, you can see these intricate backgrounds, and this is huge. These are over life size. Okay, and then here we have an example of mysticism. So the Lamb of God is another term for Jesus Christ, and here he is bleeding into a chalice, right, which symbolizes Christ's sacrifice, etc. All right, and then you have multiple people coming to admire. You have Eve on the right, you have Adam on the left. Okay, so just truly, truly incredible. So everyday objects combined with Christ, and really amusing. Like, look at the face of this angel here and the little neck rolls that she has. Just truly incredible. All right, keeping going. So I'm going to go through some without really talking about them, simply because we do not have time. This is, however, a very good example of perspective. Okay, so you can see how this would be the vanishing point, but not everything necessarily aligns perfectly. Okay, continuing. Oh, these are just so amazing. Okay, keeping going. And a little shrine. Okay, so just a lot here that I wish we had time to go into, but we unfortunately do not. So it's frozen. So as we are doing this, admire the atmospheric perspective, right? So the concept that things in the background become smaller and bluish as they fade away. As it literally leaves us on the screen. Okay. All right. So, and iconoclasm, which we talked about for the Reformation. Okay. So for the 1500s, we have printmaking on the rise, because in 1448 we have the Gutenberg press, right, which is for printing books, but the same principle is used to create prints. So inking a plate and pressing that onto paper makes it much more, much easier to create art, and it's much cheaper. So we also have the view of artists changing from craftspeople, so someone who is technically skilled, into a noble occupation, so a creative genius. Okay, and we're going to start to see a lot more tension in the work between Catholicism and Protestantism, etc. And this is an artist who is working in England, although he was German. And I just want to point out to you again the use of oil and the incredibly detailed still life. Okay, so whenever you see objects in a painting, it's not just, oh, that looks pretty, let's include it. It has a meaning, okay? So we're seeing here books, and we're seeing a globe, and instruments, and more instruments for measuring the sky. Okay, so this tells us that these are very educated men, and that they have training and knowledge, and they are scholars. And this is called The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein the Younger, and it's from 1533. Again, he was working in England, but look how sumptuous the painting is, and look at how the oil has allowed him to create just this depth of imagery. And this is an interesting piece because it has what's called an anamorphism. Excuse me. So an anamorphism is something that is placed in a painting and is kind of at odds, and doesn't really make sense until you view it from the correct angle. So if you were to look at this painting, so I'm looking at it here, and it would be like here. So to the left of the painting and forward, this would form into a skull. All right, and so a skull is a common element in painting at this time, in art of this time, and it's what's known as a memento mori, which literally means remember death. So it's the idea that we can lead a good life, and we can have wonderful, sumptuous furs and fabrics and have all this knowledge, but in the end, we all die. right? And so it's usually used to remind people of their mortality and to encourage them to religious fervor. Okay, so Hans Holbein, again, really, really beautiful work. And then Albrecht Dürer. So this is an artist from Germany, and he was engaged with Italy. He visited Italy twice. He was very strongly classical, although you can still see that his work is not really Italian Renaissance, although he does incorporate more of the Italian Renaissance into his work. This is an interesting piece. It's from 1500, and it's self-portrait in a fur-collared robe. And so what, again, just look at how detailed this is. Look at the light reflecting off his curls, okay, the individual hairs in his beard. It's truly amazing. The light in his eyes. All right. So what you probably are missing from this image is the knowledge that the way that he is posed is akin to how Christ was depicted. And so this is really the artist aggrandizing himself, making himself important. Okay, so he is not equating himself with Christ, but he is raising the status of the artist up significantly. So from someone who is talented to creative genius. All right, so continuing with his work, he is, it's frozen. He did a lot of still life and animal paintings. He did just a section of grass, which we saw briefly here. So sorry, it's again frozen. So just this emphasis on everyday life in a way that you might not see in Italy. Okay, so there is less emphasis on the religious aspect of life. There we go. Okay, so this clump of grass. Think about what that is, right? It's weeds. It's dandelions. I don't know about you, but a large portion of my youth feels like it was spent pulling dandelions. So it's not something that I would necessarily think to create this incredibly detailed painting of. Okay, so we'll move forward, and again, right, really beautiful work. But here, this is a print. So again, he's created a plate that he has then inked and pressed onto paper. And here we can see the combination of the north and the south. So the way that these bodies are constructed and the heads are rather small, this is all the epitome of the Northern Renaissance. But the musculature and the emphasis on the nude, this is very much Italian, right? Humanism. And then, just for fun, it has the four humors depicted. So for those of you who may not be aware, this was a belief that there were certain aspects of human that affected mental and physical health. So you have melancholy and phlegmatic, etc., and they're represented by both animals as well as bodily fluids. Here's the large grass. So just to show you the care that went into painting this, okay? Really incredible. Oh, moving on. Oh, I hate to do this. Okay, if you are interested in some slightly macabre, I'd be happy to talk to you about this artist. Another artist that I want to highlight for you is Matthias Grunewald, who is another German artist, but he really pushes his art to a different level. And there's this extreme emphasis on what the body is experiencing. So this is a depiction of the crucifixion of Christ, and we see saints on either side. We see the body of Christ being laid to rest in the tomb, crucifixion, and then this is Mary, his mother, Jesus' mother, with John the Evangelist, John the Baptist, and Mary Magdalene. And what we're not seeing is the inside. So these panels slide open. So this is actually the outside of the altarpiece. And this is called the Eisenheim altarpiece because of where it is located. But look at how anguished these faces are, all right? The contortion of the fingers. This is someone who has died in agony. And this would have been painted for a hospital that dealt specifically with people who were dying of skin disorders. Okay, so this was created to allow these people who are suffering great physical pain to look at Christ and feel empathy for the way that he is being tortured. So incredibly expressive. And then this is part of it. It has many, many layers. So this is the same altarpiece. And you can see that it is quite large. So the center panel, just the center panel, is 10 feet by almost 11 feet. Okay, we have 2 artists left to go, so we're almost done. Bosch. Bosch is from the Netherlands, but he is someone who is also very focused on this fantasy world with very nightmare-ish scenes. Okay, and his art was popular. He is very pessimistic. These are not optimistic depictions. Okay, let me see where the Garden of Earthly Delights is, because that's the one that you're going to know. But these are very much nightmare scenes. He doesn't have illusions about human nature or the logic of human nature. He doesn't have confidence in the kindness of humans. He's just, oh, okay, it's not in here. Give me just one sec. So he is just incredibly pessimistic about life and about humans, okay? But these works are moralizing. There are morals embedded. And he depicts humanity's vulnerability to temptation, the temptation of evil and sin, okay? So this is the Garden of Earthly Delights, which hopefully y'all are somewhat familiar with, and it is huge, okay? It is absolutely massive. And it is just this fantastical scene that even the delights, the human delights depicted here, are horrific, okay? So this is a scene of carnal pleasures, so physical pleasures. So this is kind of like supposed to be a positive depiction, but even here it's like a nightmare. It's fantastical. And we have the Garden of Eden here. So this is Adam and Eve with Christ in the center. And then we have hell on the right-hand side. And we see these really horrific demons and fantastical creatures torturing each other, and just all sorts of elements. So we have the Tree Man, who's a very famous figure, which is this humanoid with an egg for a body and just very disturbing. And then here, this is what I call a potty chair. So for those of you who may not be aware, you would set up a chair akin to this over a hole in the floor, and then you would poop into the canals, basically. And what you see here is someone pooping money, okay? So this is a very, very grim view of the world. And again, I encourage you to look at all these artists, because they will reward close looking. So the last artist I want to talk about is Peter Bruegel the Elder, and he is somewhat of an imitator of Bosch, but he also creates these scenes of everyday life. So this is a work at the DIA. It's called The Wedding Dance. And you can see that it is a depiction of peasants dancing with each other at a wedding, but there are morals embedded in these works. So even though it just looks like a depiction of people having a good time, right, it's also encouraging people to behave well, to not become like some of the people who drink too much and then engage in inappropriate behavior, etc. Okay, so he has some more docile images like these landscapes. And then he has others that are more moralizing. Okay, so let me just quickly, okay. And I want to show you that some of his work, yes, so this is called the Dutch Proverbs. Okay, so he's not simply recreating everyday life, but he is taking small stories, small snippets of wisdom, and creating these very large pieces overall that become very busy but are still cohesive. And so everything that you see here is a proverb. Okay, and you're seeing a lot of different information. And so each of these figures can be read individually to find out something new. So this would be probably crying over spilt milk. So it's done. You know, you can't pick up milk that's been spilled on the ground. It's gone for good. Okay, etc. He does something similar, but with children playing, and it's actually been really helpful for reconstructing what games children played at the time. So these are incredibly detailed depictions of everyday life, combined with an element of Boschian, so Bosch of the Garden of Earthly Delights, fantasy, and potentially nightmare-esque stuff. So that's it for the Northern Renaissance, and I'll talk to you later. Okay,